Have you ever stopped to think that history isn't always just in books? Sometimes it's literally right under our feet in these quiet, sort of forgotten places. Today, we're doing a deep dive into something really fascinating, I think. The stories held within pioneer cemeteries, those trailside graves you find across the American West, often quite poignant stories. Yeah, so our mission here is to sift through a whole stack of sources. We gathered historical articles, old travel guides, foundation reports, even some interesting online discussions. We want to pull out the key insights about these sacred grounds. We're going to look at who the pioneers were, the incredible hardships. I mean, really incredible the hardships they faced, their different cultural ways of dealing with death, and the challenges today in just keeping these records, these sites preserved.
Absolutely. And it's so important to remember as we get into this, these aren't just spots where people were buried. They're profound reflections of that whole westward expansion era. They tell us not just what happened, but maybe more importantly, why it matters. They connect us, directly to the human side of trying to build a life on a really harsh frontier. These places are real links to the past, to that courage, and frankly, that resilience.
Okay, so let's dig into this first part. The West, I mean, it wasn't settled by just one image of a pioneer, like we sometimes picture, right? Resources really highlight this incredible mix of communities, different people, different backgrounds, and their histories are, well, they're etched right into these cemeteries.
Yeah, exactly. And one really striking example is the story of historic Negro Bar in California. This was a significant mining town back in the gold rush around 1848. But what's really fascinating and tells you something is the Negro Bar Cemetery itself. It actually dates back to 1846. Before the gold rush really kicked off, it just underlines how early and how significant the presence of pioneers of Pan-African descent was in that region.
hmm And the scale might surprise you too. There was this early land grant, Rancho Rio de los Americanos, established way back in 1844. And that really anchored a lot of the development by these pioneers along the American River Parkway. It's a foundational piece of California history, really.
Which brings us to kind of a contemporary issue mentioned in the sources. There seem to be concerns about what some people are calling cloaked California state-led efforts to distort, destroy, and disregard authentic California gold rush history, specifically about Negro Bar. It sounds like a complicated situation because on one hand, you have these current multi-million-dollar projects like the Black Miners Bar Initiative that started in 2022 just across Lake Natoma, and those are explicitly meant to honor these pioneers. But clearly the fight for, let's say, full preservation and accurate recognition, it's still ongoing. There's even talk about using the old 1906 Antiquity Act to give these sites better protection.
All right, it's an ongoing story.
No.
Okay, so from Negro Bar, let's shift gears a bit. Another really vibrant community during the gold rush was Grass Valley, also in California. And what's really interesting here is how quickly they organized themselves. The Sher Zedek Hebrew Benevolent Society, that means Gates of Righteousness, they formed it in 1856. And its specific purpose was caring for the sick, the dying, and importantly, managing their cemetery.
Yeah, and if you zoom out a little, that really shows you the importance of these mutual aid societies. It was about organized community life, helping each other out on the frontier. You see the same thing with the Jewish cemetery in Folsom, set up around 1861. It points to that same kind of collective effort.
And time takes its toll, doesn't it?
It does. Many of the headstones in the Grass Valley Jewish Cemetery have crumbled. It's a constant battle against the elements, against time itself. But the names we do know, people like Solomon Rosenthal, he was a saloon keeper, or Simon Nowitzki, a tailor and merchant, they're not just names. They represent that diverse entrepreneurial spirit. Jewish pioneers were integral to building these early towns.
Definitely. And then, of course, you have the really dramatic and often quite tragic stories of the Latter-day Saint pioneers, the Mormon pioneers. You find cemeteries across Utah dedicated to these settlers from the mid-1800s.
The Mormon Pioneer Memorial Monument in Salt Lake City is particularly significant. Yes, it's the final resting place for famous figures like Brigham Young and the poet Eliza R. Snow, but its bigger role really is to memorialize the estimated 6,000 plus pioneers who died making that journey west between 1847 and 1869. Just think about that number. Over 6,000. It tells you so much about the risks involved.
Wow. Yeah, and you can visit other places too, like Lehigh Pioneer Cemetery. They claim it's Utah's oldest first burials around 1851. Or think about the Protestant Pioneer Cemetery in Silver Reef. Only 11 marked graves out of 43 known burials. All these sites, together they just echo those immense hardships, the sacrifices. So many people lost loved ones along the way.
And then there's another layer, another community with distinct practices, the Chinese pioneers. This is quite interesting. In places like Idaho City, where they were a huge part of the population in the 1870s, you actually don't find many Chinese grave markers. It's a noticeable difference.
So what's going on there? What does that tell us about their experience or their culture?
Well, it points to a very specific and deeply held cultural practice. It was customary for Chinese individuals, if they died abroad, to eventually be repatriated. Their bones would be carefully exhumed after several years, cleaned, placed in smaller boxes, and then shipped back to China.
Back to their homeland.
Exactly, for final burial with their ancestors. And the sources suggest that fires in Idaho City, which destroyed a lot of records and maybe wooden markers, probably meant that many were sent back simply listed as unknown. It really underscores this profound connection they maintained to their homeland, even in death.
That makes sense. Okay, this kind of leads us naturally into the grim reality of pioneer life, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Death was it was a constant presence. The statistics we found are, frankly, shocking.
They really are. Take Idaho City's Pioneer Cemetery again. The sources say that out of the first 200 burials there, only 28 people died from natural causes.
Only 28 out of 200.
Right. All the rest, mining accidents, other kinds of accidents, violence. You had a large, booming city with a very small police force. It paints a picture of a pretty dangerous, precarious existence.
And then you look at the trails, like the Oregon Trail.
Yeah.
The estimated mortality rate is just staggering, something like 15 graves per mile.
15 per mile, though finding marked graves today is very, very unusual.
Yeah, hard to even imagine. One source mentioned a single wagon train where 6 family members out of 30 people died before they even got to California.
A fifth of the group, gone.
Just gone.
And the causes were varied, but disease was a huge one. Things like cholera, dysentery, measles, they swept through wagon trains. We have names like William L. Clary and Charles Bishop. Both 49ers both died of cholera in Wyoming. Lorenzo Smith lost his sister Eliza to cholera crossing the plains. Little Ada McGill, just 3 years old, died of dysentery. These weren't just numbers, they were individual tragedies repeated over and over.
Absolutely heartbreaking. And beyond disease, just accidents.
Yeah.
They were everywhere. River crossings were incredibly dangerous.
Oh, notoriously so. The Platte River, for instance. Swift currents, cold water. Many people and their livestock drowned trying to cross.
And then freak accidents, like Martin Ringo dying from an accidental gunshot.
Right. And we also have to consider violence, which was definitely a factor. PVT Ralston Baker, for instance, died during an attack by Native Americans in 1867. The Kelly Larimer wagon train was attacked in 1864. 5 people died in that incident.
And there's that one famous case, right? Ephraim Brown's grave.
Yes, that's supposedly the only known homicide grave actually on the Oregon Trail itself, killed in a family dispute back in 1857. It's a stark reminder of the human conflicts, too.
And even childbirth.
Even childbirth was incredibly risky. We see that with the death of Sarah Ann Jones. You have disease, accidents, violence, childbirth complications. The dangers were just multifaceted.
Given all that, the high death rates and the incredibly difficult conditions, it makes sense that burial practices had to adapt. And that's led to some unique characteristics we see in these cemeteries, but also some major preservation challenges today.
Exactly. In the towns that got established, formal cemeteries did pop up pretty quickly. And interestingly, they often had designated sections right from the start. You know, sections for Masons or the Odd Fellows. That was another big fraternal aid society, Catholics, Jewish communities. You see that pattern in Folsom's Lakeside Memorial Lawn Cemetery, for example, which eventually absorbed the older Negro Bar Cemetery.
Okay, so that's in the towns,
Yeah.
but out on the trails, completely different story.
Totally different. Burials were often rushed, makeshift. People were sometimes buried in very shallow graves. And there's that practice you mentioned, burying someone right in the middle of the trail itself and then driving the wagons over the spot.
Yeah, the idea being to hide the grave from Native American tribes, though some sources debate how common that specific hiding motive was. Some online discussions even grimly call it the speed bumps theory.
Right. Or sometimes they just pile rocks on top, partly as a marker, partly to keep animals away. But over time, with weather and erosion, many of those just disappeared.
Vanished. And the markers themselves, if they were wood.
Wood just doesn't last. Weather, fire, it decays. That's why in Idaho City, for instance, out of maybe 3,000 estimated burials, most don't have markers today. The original markers are just gone.
So, thinking about all these challenges, what does this mean for us now? How do we deal with this legacy? The story of the orphaned Washoe City Cemetery in Nevada seems like a really stark example of what can happen.
It really is. Orphaned, meaning it lacks clear ownership or responsibility. It's overgrown, neglected. There's even been headstone theft, which is just terrible. And apparently cost estimates for restoration were done way back in 1962, but the money was just never allocated. It fell through the cracks.
Wow, since 62, that's a long time for neglect.
It is. And it leads to another interesting kind of modern problem that one source touches on. In Camas County, Idaho, the Mountain View Cemetery is technically full.
Full, like no more space?
Well, not necessarily no physical space, but all the plots are sold. So people in the community, like the author Clelgie Ballard mentions this, they've been told things like, well, if someone dies, they might have to be put in cold storage until the cemetery can be improved or expanded.
Cold storage, seriously.
Yeah. It highlights this very real, practical grave problem that some small rural communities across the West are facing even today. Infrastructure, funding, it's complex.
But it's not all neglect and problems, right? There are people trying to save these places.
Oh, absolutely. Despite the huge challenges, there are some incredible efforts. The Idaho City Historical Foundation, for example, they're actively working to repair and maintain the markers they do have. California state parks are involved with sites like Black Miners Bar, trying to ensure those histories are properly honored and interpreted.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. And zooming out again, things like the calls for an Orphan Cemetery Preservation Act in Nevada that shows there's a growing recognition that we need legislative action, community involvement, dedicated funding to protect these vital links to our past before they're just completely lost to time. These aren't just plots of land. They hold crucial stories.
Right. So we've taken quite a journey here in our deep dive, looking at these silent witnesses of westward expansion, the pioneer cemeteries, the trailside graves that dot the American West. We've touched on the incredible diversity of the people who built these lands, the immense, just constant hardships they faced, and these ongoing challenges of trying to preserve their legacies.
Mm-hmm. And whether it's a grand monument in a city or just a humble pile of stones out on the plains that maybe only a few people know is a grave, these sites offer these really tangible, very human connections to the past. A past filled with just unbelievable courage, struggle, but also incredible resilience. They remind us, I think, that history isn't just about the big events or famous names. It's about individual lives, individual sacrifices, and stories that really, truly deserve to be remembered.
Yeah. Hopefully, as you go about your day now, maybe if you pass an old cemetery or see a historical marker, you'll look at it with maybe a slightly new appreciation for the human stories behind it.
Absolutely. And it kind of leaves you with a question, doesn't it? How many other stories are still out there? Untold stories, hidden just beneath the surface or maybe obscured by time, just waiting. Mm-hmm. And what responsibility do we have now, as people living in the present, built on that past, to actually seek out and try to understand these silent witnesses who laid the foundation? Makes you think.